African men, because they've gotten married to this woman and because they paid a certain sort of a dowry to get married to her, they feel like they have this privilege to be beating her up.
Entitlement.
You know, they feel like because they've gotten married to this woman, she has to fit a certain cookie cutter mold. She has to be ABC, and if she's not, she's required to be disciplined.
Yes.
And
greetings and welcome back again to State of Mind right here on Switch Media. I'm excited to be having an interesting discussion, and I know that you obviously want to join us there on social media. So join us on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube on Switch TV Kenya, on Instagram on Switch TV KE. I know you're wondering what we're discussing today, and today's discussion is on the war on gender-based violence. Our team decided to go to the streets and see what you know in regards to gender-based violence, and this is what they had to say.
In my opinion, gender-based violence is any form of violence, either physical or emotional, towards a partner, a friend.
The society perceived women as weaklings, so it turns out to be most of the time that the females are the ones getting abused because they're considered as weak.
Most cases, when a lady comes out, it is more believable. Plus, there's this perception of if a guy hits me, whether intentional or not, that is violence to me.
Male think they are superior, and the ego inside them, and having the fact that I can't tell this thing to the world that I was harmed, yet it's believed I'm the superior in the relationship.
Kwa Kiswahili wanasema wanaume huvumilia. So itakuwa very ironical for a man kwenda kwa police station ama kwa, because mostly zinakuwa reported kwa police station. First of all, as a man ukienda kwa police station 90% wenye utapata kwa OB wanaume kama wewe. So ukienda kusema ndo kawe, mbona unachapa na mwanamke unakaliwa chapati, such kind of a thing. So it's better ukufe nayo rather than ukuje out in the open to say that physically umepigwa na bibi, kitu kama hiyo.
I'd be worried if my partner hit me once, because, you know, once someone is used to something, you can't say that that person's gonna forget it just like that, like, I've forgiven that person, so there's no way he's gonna do it again. He'll obviously repeat it because he's done it.
I think the government should educate people more on the importance of being equal in the society.
Kama kuna effective communication, ni ngumu sana upate watu wanaenda to the extent of kupigana physically.
We should all come to accept ourselves as one. Like, they shouldn't be like, this gender is best than this gender.
In case of women, let us try to be more open-minded about things. Do not just rush, I've been hit, I want to go and report it to the police, to the sijui who. Let us sit down, let us think. And for men, let us come out. It just comes down to us. Before the government steps in, you have to be the one who has stood out for yourself. So, yeah.
Welcome back to the show. And now that you've heard what people on the ground think about gender-based violence and what war is being taken up against these acts, it's time to come back to the show and listen to expert women who have extremely good experience in regards to this topic. And I'd like to welcome these lovely, lovely ladies to the show. On the far right, we have Amina Murtaza, who is a psychologist by training. On here, we have Alberta Wamboa, who's the executive director of Gender Violence Recovery Center and a sociologist by training. So welcome, Alberta. You can start with you. You can introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Alberta Wamboa. I work at the Gender Violence Recovery Center as the executive director. And mainly we work towards prevention and response to gender-based violence.
Okay. Welcome, Alberta. Now, Amina, tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Amina Hakimi, Amina Murtaza. I am a psychologist, a very young practicing psychologist. I've studied at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, and during and after my studies, I've had the opportunity to be working at several rescue homes for children and women. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Amina. So tell us, Alberta, according to you, what is gender-based violence? How would you describe it?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So gender-based violence is violence perpetrated based on your gender, just because you're male or female. It has power dynamics, you know, so the perpetrator would have power over you.
Yes.
And it's perpetrated in different forms, and it can happen to anyone irrespective of economic status, of age, of whatever it is. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So in regards to gender-based violence,
Yes.
most people think that it's only, you know, it mainly focuses on the physical aspect of abuse, the being battered, the being harassed. So what other forms would you say we have in gender-based violence?
So there are different forms of gender-based violence, and so we have sexual violence, we have physical violence,
Yes.
we have intimate partner violence that would happen between intimate partners.
Yes.
We have violence also, we have economic violence, we have emotional or psychological abuse, but we also have violence that's harmful traditional practices, for
Yes.
example, that are culturally entrenched. For example, female genital mutilation,
Yeah.
child marriages, wife inheritance, and so forth.
Okay, okay. Thank you for that. So, Amina, why is it that women are the ones that are mostly affected by gender-based violence? I know we've had cases where we also have men being affected also, but why is it women are the ones that we find mostly being affected?
Of course, yes, it goes without saying, especially in Kenya, in our nation, women and children are the most vulnerable people in our society.
Yes.
And, you know, you can't help but ask why it's happening. I think it's because, number one, gender inequality. African men, because they've gotten married to this woman, and because they paid a certain sort of a dowry to get married to her, they feel like
Yes.
they have this privilege to be beating her up.
Entitlement.
You know, they feel like because they've gotten married to this woman, she has to fit a certain cookie cutter mold. She has to be ABC, and if she's not, she's required to be disciplined.
Yes.
And, you know, and discipline more often than not comes in form of violence, of course. Secondly, I feel, before I even forget, I would like to mention how, you know, the BBC had recently, after COVID, they released a documentary to shed light on this whole GBV situation of Kenya.
Yes.
And it showed that there was like a 300% rise in occurrence of cases when it came to GBV. And this was also explicable in a way that a lot of men were losing their jobs.
Yeah.
A lot of men were, you know, being laid off. And this was in turn making men feel kind of frustrated when they were coming home, because they were seeing empty stomachs they have to feed, and were not necessarily going to understand why there's no food on the table. So this was again causing a lot of friction between men and women.
Men and
I would
women in
say,
the families. Okay, okay. And so for you, what do you feel, you know, women are mostly the main caregivers of their children. So how does it affect how the children are actually brought up in such settings?
Wow, okay. Like I said, I've worked with, you know, children who have been rescued, right? There was this time when I was counseling 3 different boys of completely different age, of completely, you know, different personality, nothing in common. But the only thing that was, you know, common about these 3 boys was the fact that they were okay with the GBV situation. They were justifying it almost. And, you know, I would like to quote them, but they spoke in Kiswahili. My Kiswahili is not that good.
Okay.
But the first boy said it was the dad had apparently lost his job, and the mom was now earning. So in order to remind her of his strengths, he had to keep beating her up to mark his territory. The second boy said nothing was wrong actually, but it was still important for the dad to again beat the mom so that she would not grow those proverbial horns, you know. And the third child, the most alarming one yet, would say he had heard his grandmother now teaching the father that it's crucial to beat your wife up.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Cut to the part where we talk about why they were even referred to me in the first place. The presenting problem for the first boy, an 11-year-old boy, was brought to the rescue home because of attempting rape of a girl his own age. The second boy had beaten up his friend to a point where he was in the hospital between life and death. Of course, now he's okay, but at that point he was not.
Yeah, he wasn't doing
The
well.
third child now was actually a girl who was pretending to be a boy because of an inborn fear that you know,
being a girl,
that if I'm a girl, I'm gonna be beaten up. There's no other way. So the only way to escape it is to be a boy, and if you're not, just pretend to be one. So this is how the children, the youth, the generation of Kenya is being poisoned.
Okay. Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely to share from such experiences, and to also learn and also point out when you see something on the ground. You get to know that this child may actually be suffering from effects of gender-based violence. So tell us, Alberta, you mentioned about economic violence. You know, we totally understand physical, sexual violence, economic violence. Is it not sending fair? What is economic violence? What is it exactly? Tell us.
Okay, so economic violence can come in many aspects, and for example, not giving equal opportunities. Yeah, so I'll give you an
okay.
example. Some time back, when a woman would go to a bank to ask for a loan, you'd
Yes.
have to ask for permission and so forth.
Yeah.
Or for example, so there are no equal economic opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Economic can also be, I've seen women who you earn your money, but you
Mhm.
have to come and give it to your spouse or a
Yes.
man.
Mm-hmm.
Men can also be perpetrated, where you go and earn your money, and when you come to the house, it's controlled. So
Yes.
you're told, no, you can only have this much of the money.
Mm.
Or again, you're denied to go and work.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're here, you want to go and have to earn a living, but you're
Mhm.
told, no, you cannot earn a living.
Yes.
So these are some of the economic, would I say, abuses. Some of them are systemic. So for
Mhm.
example, when you look at the percentage of women owning land, that's
Yeah.
already an economic issue, because then they do not have the capital, or it's not, would I say, allowed. Some of it, it's cultural.
Yes.
For example, when it's family inheritance,
Mhm.
the men, the boys, the men would be given the ancestral
land,
land, but
yeah.
the women, you'll go get married elsewhere. You know,
Yeah.
so some of it is stopping, yes, some of it no. So there are different ways that it plays out, and why I'm saying it's systemic is because sometimes you find we are in a patriarchal society.
Mhm.
So would I say the tools or the foundation to be able for women or girls to be economically empowered
Yeah.
are not there. So you might find that even the socialization or how
Mhm.
people are brought up. So when you
Mhm.
come from school, the girls will have to do the household. Yeah,
Yes.
the boys will have to. They can go play once they
Yeah.
finish their homework. So
Yeah.
you're not giving this person, or when their families where if there's little money and it's a boy and a girl,
Mhm.
the boy will be paid for to go to school. Yeah,
The girl stays
the
home.
girl stays home. So for example, even when you're buying toys, you'd buy aeroplanes and cars and buy these dolls for the girl. So you're
Yes.
already setting a mindset.
Mm.
So there's some limit that this girl cannot be an engineer.
Mhm.
You can only have the caring jobs, being a nurse, stay at home, be a teacher.
Mhm.
So that already starts putting you in that mindset and limits you in terms of economic empowerment, or
Oh.
rather being economically independent.
Okay, that's a brilliant and very beautiful explanation of economic violence. So let me ask, in regards to physical violence, is it okay if someone hits you once? Where do you draw the line exactly and say that I actually think I'm getting abused? Is being hit once, twice, thrice? What mode of hitting can you say that one is actually getting physically abused?
None.
Okay.
No one should hit you. No one should hit you.
Yeah.
And it's important to say that some of these forms of violence do not occur in isolation. So by the time someone is slapping you,
Mm-hmm.
there might have been emotional abuse. There
Yes.
might have been, verbal abuse.
Yeah.
So it's a no. Nothing, whatever form of abuse, nothing justifies violence.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And exactly what you're saying is the reflection of society. So the survivors that we get at GVRC, we were about 3,600 in a year,
Mm-hmm.
are not coming because it was one slap or verbal abuse. They're
Yes.
coming because their hands are cut off,
Mm.
their private parts, penis is cut off.
Mm.
They're coming because it's serious rape cases, they're having fistulas and all that. So that's the reason. It's
Yeah.
because then we've tolerated violence and thinking when you hit me and hit me badly, only
Yeah.
then is
Is
when
it
is it
actually?
violence. No. Violence could start even from the verbal abuse and all that, and it needs to we need to have conversation and really stop it and prevent the abuse. So nothing,
Yeah.
it's not about one slap or two slaps,
Mhm.
no. It's just strong.
Okay.
Shouldn't happen.
Okay, thank you for that. So now when we come back after the break, Amina is going to be telling us about the telltale signs of someone who is getting abused. So join us after the break. You can also look up what we're discussing on Twitter, Instagram and YouTube on Switch TV Kenya, and also on Instagram, Switch TV KE. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. We are still right here and we are waiting for you to discuss the myths, misconceptions, and also the solutions in regards to gender-based violence. I know you're right there on social media, so you can follow us and also give us feedback on Twitter, Facebook on YouTube, on Switch TV Kenya, and Instagram, Switch TV KE. So, did you know that? So now, Amina, tell us, what are the telltale signs that someone is getting abused?
Oh wow, there are quite a few. I think the first and the most clear one would be to look out for bruises, finger marks across the face, of someone who's being smacked. But I think the answer lies within the finer details. More often than not, we see the abuser, now the perpetrator, is insisting on accompanying the partner everywhere they go. And this is not even because they're, they love their partner too much, or they're just wanting to be around them too much. It's because they kind of want to show a sense of dominance. One other sign that I would say, they're very good at love bombing. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but love bombing is a term that's, we use to describe a person who is very good at making up after a fight.
Yes.
They know they've done something really wrong. They know they've emotionally abused this person.
Yes.
So they would shower them with gifts, with compliments, with praises, so as to win them back. Also, I feel like the victim now is being abused is always kind of eager to please their partner. For example, they would want to check in with them every time they make a small decision.
Yes.
When they're around other people, they would hesitate before answering a question, either because they feel like they have to seek that validation from them in order to voice their opinion, or they need to, just get their permission to be able to speak. Also, I feel like someone who is going through abuse would go through very many breakups and makeups. Because for someone who is going through abuse would have to leave and come back in order to be able to reclaim their lives, because this is not something that happens overnight. You can't just say, I'm being abused, next morning you leave. This is something that it's a process.
Yes.
And there's a lot of trauma bonding that's also involved. You're bonded to your captor, you're bonded to your abuser. This is someone you actually loved at some point, right? So it's hard for you to realize you're being abused and leave. So of course they go through a lot of breakups.
A lot of breakups and makeups. Okay, good. So thank you for that. So now, Alberta, tell us, what would you do to step in for somebody who's been abused? Somebody who's gone through gender-based violence. What are you doing in your gender violence recovery center? What can we, as the laymen, also do about it? So tell us about it.
So I'll talk in terms of response. So what we do, one, is to create awareness across the country, and sometimes even beyond, because we get survivors beyond Kenya. So it's in a language, and not just in terms of language, but just in a way that each target group would understand that abuse is what abuse is actually, what gender-based violence is, and where they would get help, and also the prevention of the same, because we've gone to communities where violence is being perpetrated and you don't even know that, they don't realize that it's violence, because that's how they're socialized, or that's the tolerance that's there. So once they know, is because then once someone is abused, most of them then would come to the Gender Violence Recovery Center. So they would walk in, most of our clients are walk-in clients, and they would come for that, for the medical treatment. Again, we have a toll-free number that survivors can call. We've worked with different service providers, including teachers, healthcare service providers in different hospitals in the country, police, and that's our next source of referral, the police. So the point is, when you're abused, you just walk out to a health facility or walk to GVRC, the toll-free numbers, or call, because then rescue can also be done. Sometimes survivors are not able to reach out for that help, or go to someone that you're able to trust. And I'd like also to emphasize that they should be able to seek services, medical services, within 72 hours. So then it's working on a prophylactic treatment. So when they come to the hospital, there's medical examination, there's including lab tests. There's medical treatment, of course, following up with the clinical management of gender-based violence at a national level. So there's a manual curriculum regime around it. So they'll get this treatment. Important to say that it's not, you don't just walk in and out, is that the treatment will span depending on the injuries, but normally as an outpatient to be about 6 months. For psychosocial support, it actually harms more psychologically. So then that's the programs that are in place to do that. So there's the response that we do that's at no cost to the survivor, but it's a cost to GVRC. So we continuously fundraise to be able to pay for the medical bills. Then there's the community awareness that I mentioned. But again, important is that there's also at an advocacy level laws and policies to be able to make sure that there's resources, to make sure that there's services that are accessible, not just services that are accessible and survivor-centered, to be able to respond, but also to prevent in case that there's violence.
Okay, good. So I think at this point we can know, we have learned what to do in case you get somebody who has gone through gender-based violence. And it's important to know that you can reach out to a place where one can get medical help, psychosocial help, and also help them survive through the difficult ordeal. So Amina, tell us, what are the effects of this gender-based violence against the victim? Specifically, psychological effects. So what happens to the victims who go through gender-based violence?
You know, very mildly putting it, it starts with very many disorders: sleeping disorders, eating disorders, anxiety, depression. The victim usually feels like it's easier to engage in substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, all sorts of those things. They also tend to engage in self-harm, harboring suicidal thoughts, committing suicide even, I feel like you would know. And this would, you know, make them feel like they're coping with the trauma to an extent, but eventually it's just them putting themselves deeper in the hole, you know, because it's really not helping, and they end up becoming, you know, they end up reaching a position which was way worse than where they started.
They were before.
One thing I've also noticed with victims that I've worked with is that they tend to make themselves believe that they're going crazy. And this would happen because when you've just come out of a traumatizing relationship, you experience extreme highs and lows. You know, at some point you're feeling emotionally numb, you're not feeling anything, and the next second you're feeling extremely agitated, alert, panicky. So for me to not be able to understand what's happening to me exactly and how I should, you know, cope with it, I would try and make myself believe I'm going crazy.
Yeah, okay, good. So basically most of the effects are mainly psychological. They could be physical, they could be emotional, but psychological effects are what you've discussed as being pretty harmful to the victims of this gender-based violence. So as we wind up, Alberta, where do you feel we are at as a country in regards to management of gender-based violence and the war against it?
Wow. So one, in terms of the framework, we are doing a good job. And a lot of this work happened, unfortunately, around COVID. During the COVID period. And that's where even for GVRC, that's the year we had the highest, you know, number of survivors in a year since inception, being 22 years old tomorrow. And around 2007, there was also a flare-up, you know, in terms of gender-based violence around the electoral period. We're aware about the cycles, you know, when there's drought, there's increments in
violence.
the same, there's COVID pandemic that happened around the election period that happened. So yes, it's work that we should have done earlier, you know, but again, we are a society that buries, I think, our head, you know, in the sand around gender-based violence. So around COVID and answering you where we are, a lot of things came into place. We had generational equality forum commitments, and Kenya made 12 commitments on different ways to address gender-based violence. So it was really nice around funding, around services, around data, you know, evidence driven programming and all that. Around the same period also, we had the National Crime and Research institution, you know, just being able to to say, you know,
Yes.
what was the prevalence of gender-based violence. We also have KDHAIS, that's Kenya Demographic Health Survey, that has recently been released. Looking forward to the full report recently, but the key indicators have been released. So when we look at this, for things like female genital mutilation, for example, we're down by almost 10%.
That's true.
So great progress.
Yeah.
When it reaches a point where we're not tolerating, but we're talking about gender-based violence, it's better. We are not yet there, but it's more spoken about. We're here, for
agree.
example, on Switch, discussing it, you know. You have your personal spaces where people are talking about gender-based violence.
That's true.
And so there is progress in terms of discussing it. There is progress in terms of response.
Yes.
Because there are things like the universal health coverage, for example, that incorporates gender-based violence management benefits. We have curriculums, you know, around that have recently been revised under NASCOP. We have the community health volunteers. They've now incorporated a GBV manual, for example, into their curriculum. So there's new gender-based violence tools. We have now, for example, for the first time, have a GBV scorecard. So slowly into these spaces, we are getting more structured in terms of response, but also prevention.
Yeah.
We have a gender unit, for example, at the police. They have a hotline number, you know, but now we are pushing for the sex crimes unit. So then it's also, so there is progress in the right direction. We had, you know, we had the states, the president coming for the International Women's Day just on Wednesday.
Yes.
So there is political goodwill, there is framework in place. Yes, the violence is still happening, sadly so, but we are in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us a rundown of where we are actually headed to as a country. So now, as we wind up, what are your parting shots? And would you please give us the social media handles where people can find you, and in case they want to talk to you and discuss more?
My social media handle is Amina Hakimi on Instagram, and that's where anybody and everybody can find me.
People can always find you on social media. So what are your closing remarks in regards to gender-based violence?
Gender-based, I feel like more effort. This is something that I would like to, this is something I also try to talk about with my younger siblings and younger, you know, friends. This is something that people need to become more aware about right from the point that you start dating, you know. You need to start having real conversations, like how do we budget? What happens when we're not agreeing on a certain point? What happens when you're upset with me? How do you react? You know, this is something that's usually skipped when people are dating, and before you even know it, you're already stuck in an abusive relationship. You were blinded by, you know, materialistic possessions that probably he had to offer, a big house, a big car, and before you know it, you're already married to him. And that's when you realize that this is an abusive person I got married to. And it's much harder to leave an abusive marriage than it would ever be to probably leave an abusive fling
at the early stages of it.
Okay, so judge early on, you know, get to know who you're in love with.
Okay, thank you, Amina. So Alberta, your social media handles and also your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you. So at GVC Kenya, I'll share a toll-free number, which is 0700 820 565. Then most of the questions will be answered, or rescues or referrals. My parting shot would be gender-based violence is not, as you say, a war that can be fought by one person, and you do not need to be in an institution or to be in a certain, you know, level to be able to discuss it or fight it. So in our own spaces, as Amina talks, you know, discussing it with her siblings, you know, me discussing with my children, with my partner, is just calling it out and stop being bystanders, and there's help out there.
Okay. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining us today. We've had a wonderful discussion. I'm sure the viewers back at home have enjoyed themselves, and have also learned a lot. So we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.